But if you lose connectivity, please do reconnect by phone. I think the phone information is in the agenda and in the email Caitlin sent. On Teams, keep your phones muted until you need to speak. And you can turn off your sound on any other devices around you to minimize any interference. You can unmute yourself when called upon to speak. The moderator cannot unmute you, so you have to do that from your end. If you're by phone, which if anyone needs to rejoin by phone, you hit *6 to unmute. You can use the raise hand function if you need to speak, or turn on your video, although I believe we all should have our videos on for this meeting. The meeting chat is active, but that is only for technical assistance. If there are any business items or comments, please share those verbally. We'll do voting by roll call, I believe, or how we'll do voting the way we normally do voting, I believe, with virtual meetings. And this is a public forum. Anything associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements. So with that, I think we can dive right into May 1st meeting minutes. So that was last month. Did folks have a chance to take a look? Any comments or edits on those? All right.
I move their adoption.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Several seconds. And all those in favor of approving the meeting minutes?
Aye.
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 All right. Looks like May 1st meeting minutes are approved, and we can move on to the next excuse me, the next item, the Race to Rebuilding Trust and Community NOFA results and next steps. So I know the last time we heard of this, it was sort of at the early stages of that NOFA and application process. So I think we all look forward to getting an update of how that played out and what happens next.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly, that was a great segue, but I'll just quickly introduce Elizabeth Matlock. She's from the County Manager's Office and has been sort of spearheading the Race to Rebuilding Trust NOFA process. So we had asked her to come today just to kind of give a debrief about sort of how things went, what the results were, and any future next steps for the program. So I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight. I have a little bit of a presentation just to show some of the results for your reference, and I look forward to hearing any thoughts you all have. So I will share my screen. Okay, so last time I spoke to you all, I had to look back on my calendar. It was in January, which was right when the applications had just been turned in, and we were just about to start training reviewers. So I tried to pick up at that point and cover what happened from that point on. So again, it was a partnership between county staff from mostly the county manager's office, but DHS also participated a little, and the United Way of the National Capital Area. So we received 38 proposals that were completed. There were 2 proposals that we received that were not completed, and when proposals were submitted, we checked for completeness. We gave applicants a 24-hour window to turn in any of the backup paperwork that they didn't have. And if they did not do that, then we did not consider their application. So 38 complete proposals, 36 of them were multi-year requests because it was an option to request up to 3 years of funding. If we look at the total amount requested in the first year, it was over $5 million. The total amount requested over the 3 years was almost approaching 15 million. Our available funding was $1.5 million. Like that's what we went into this process thinking. Because of the way county board funding works, we were going to have to pull all of the multi-year funding requests from that 1-year pot of money because our current board can't obligate future boards to spend money a certain way. So if we had been able to award multiple years of funding, it would have all had to come from that $1.5 million. The board did add 900,000 to the available funding in the adopted budget. So we ended up awarding close to $2.4 million. The applicants reported their proposal categories. And so most of them, as you can see, tried to address inequities and disparities in the area of social connection and community building and economic security. So out of the 38 proposals, 28 of them dealt with community building and social connection, 27 with economic security, etc. They were allowed to select more than one option as far as what they dealt with. We also asked what population they mostly served. And so this shows the breakdown of that. Again, they were able to select more than one option. Most reported that their proposals served historically marginalized communities and individuals or households with low income, which is not much of a surprise that those were our two highest categories. Other categories typically involved like immigrants was a popular, because we asked them to define what other meant. So immigrants and refugees and individuals with disabilities. I guess that's on there too. So when I spoke to you last, we had just received the applications. So looking at what the reviewer process looked like from that point on. We had been recruiting reviewers in the late fall. And so we recruited from county departments and the community. All of the reviewers we selected completed conflict of interest forms. They were randomly assigned into panels consisting of 2 staff members and 2 community members. And all of the reviewers received training on using the scoring rubric, how to score objectively and try to remove bias from the process. And they also received Arlington County's racial equity training, which all staff receive. So we gave them, all of the reviewers, a couple of the modules from our county training on racial equity. The proposals then were randomly assigned to the panels. We had 5 different review panels. Each panel received 7 to 8 proposals. And we tried to check to be sure that there were no conflicts of interest based on the conflict of interest forms for the panel members. Then the reviewers individually scored their proposals. They had about a month to individually score their set of proposals. And then they met and facilitated panels to review the scores and set a consensus score. So those sessions took, I would say each group met around 8 hours. It took around an hour per proposal, and they literally went question by question discussing their scores and coming up with what a score that they could agree on for that question. And at the end, they were asked to make some kind of funding decision based on the proposal's request. And most of the review panels were very uncomfortable with that decision. And part of that was our oversight. We did not train reviewers on how to think about funding and the funding request specifically. And so we ended up with most of the review panels, we ended up asking them, well, would you fund them? Yes, no, or maybe. And then we took those answers and with the United Way team and then with the board discussed, these are the scores. This is what the general recommendations were for funding and what should we do with it. So when the board saw the scores, they came up with this kind of metric for how they would make the awards. We wanted to make the awards based off of scores and honor the reviewers' work and effort that they put towards coming up with those scores. So we kept the proposals in order of their scores and funded all proposals which scored above the average score, which was a 34.95. So if you scored a 35 or above, the organization was funded. All awards were capped at $225,000. We only funded 1 year requests because we only funded the first year of request because it's the pilot year and we just didn't have enough money in the pot to fund multiple years and to fund as many organizations as the board wanted with multiple years. Cap the awards at $225,000. Fully fund proposals which scored above the 75th percentile, which was a score of 40.75. And then fund the remaining portion of the awards at 75%. So the chart on the right shows the organizations that scored above that 75th percentile and what their request was. And so they were fully funded with the exception of, I think, Northern Virginia Family Service had the cap put on their request. And then these are the organizations that scored between the average and that 75th percentile mark. And they had 75% of their request funded, except for EduFuturo, which they also had a cap put in. And so this funding supported a pretty wide variety of services across the county, after school and youth programming, support for individuals with intellectual and or developmental disabilities, comprehensive reentry services for individuals following incarceration, small business and culinary training, pet clinics, diversity, equity, and inclusion, capacity building for nonprofits, new parent education, immigrant and refugee services like legal assistance and employment services, educational support programming, comprehensive healthcare services, family programming, direct services for older adults, advocacy and services for survivors of domestic violence, employment services for day laborers, emergency financial assistance, bilingual case management, restorative justice, and English language training. So I think as the group leading this, we were pretty happy with it. Looks like a wide variety of services were covered, and we tried to touch a lot of different areas of the county. Then we've been offering grant feedback for the applicants. We shared score sheets, which had the consensus score for every question and had summarizing comments. We shared those score sheets with all the applicants. 14, we offered the opportunity for like a personal meeting and feedback with all the applicants. 14 organizations requested that meeting. And we anticipate a report on the evaluation of the process from United Way in August. United Way is conducting interviews with the reviewers, with applicants, with staff who've worked on it, with board members, trying to come up with like what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do next year. A few early lessons learned. We want to, like, things that I've heard in discussion is that we want to find a way to create kind of a more focused funding priorities. We left this process pretty wide open as far as what, like, the topic had to be human services. And there was an equity focus in the questions, but we want to try to maybe focus that priority a little bit more clearly. How to best center community voice and need. We relied on community reviewers, and we also relied on questions that asked for like data from the community and how much input did the community have in the formation of this program. But we also, I think it would be good to find another way to get community input in that process. And then we've heard feedback that establishing funding constraints up front would be good. We didn't know about the cap, and we didn't know about 1 year of funding until it came time to make the award decision. So knowing that up front would have been helpful for organizations. I think we would love to find a way to be able to do multi-year grant awards. I don't know how with limited funding, but it would be nice to figure it out. We are considering a way, part of this grant process, we really want to help like startup nonprofits. And so maybe creating a mini grant opportunity would be a valuable effort. So have the bigger grants, but then smaller grants for the smaller nonprofits that probably have a more streamlined application and would be a little more accessible. We want to offer that racial equity training that we offered to the reviewers, offer it to the applicants as well. And we want to incorporate, sorry, I mistyped this, but incorporating reviewers who consider all proposals, not just a set. So reviewers we had amazing reviewers who very thoughtfully discussed and considered their set of proposals, but it would have been helpful to have reviewers who looked at all of the proposals and could kind of see how they weigh against each other. There are always ways to streamline the application, simplify edit questions, and look at the page limits. And then also, how should we align this process with other grant processes, which I know is something that we discussed last time I was here too. So that is what I have for how the process has gone. And I would love any comments, thoughts, or anything.
Steve, I saw your hand first. Go for it.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It really goes to your last statement, and this is a broad question. Many of the groups that you funded are program funds. Many of the programs that we fund at like 20 or 25,000, you can fund over 100,000, 200,000. And while they might not be exactly the same program within the not-for-profit, they're super, super close at the very least without seeing the details. And so it's I think, a question, why do we have two processes? Should our process be incorporated into yours, or should yours be incorporated into ours? But it just seems to me that I don't see this. I mean, it seems like just absolute duplication. And if I was a not-for-profit, anyway, that's my question. So why the two different programs? And is there a difference between them, which I don't see, except for we wouldn't do a pet thing, but but that's my question. And so you led right into it with your last comment. So thank you so much.
I think, and Caitlin or Jennifer, you can also add to this. I think they were different pots of money to start out with. This was specifically taken, this pot of funding was specifically taken after a review of what council had historically given at a very discretionary kind of ad hoc basis. And so that led to this community engagement effort with BIPOC leaders to discuss how to make this grant process. So it has that history behind it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You get the history, but it doesn't answer the question.
Well, I think one thing that Elizabeth mentioned, just before is that, these funding sources, have, particularly the funding sources that make up the Community Development Fund, have very specific eligibility criteria. And I think a lot of what the Race to Rebuilding Trust, how it shook out, a lot of those organizations would also be eligible for our funding. But I think at least folding our process into another process where you really have to be careful about eligibility criteria, compliance, would be a bit of a challenge. So I think that, we're definitely, I think one of the things that we're, Elizabeth and Jennifer and I have talked about already is how can we, lend some or take some best practices from each process to make our processes better. But also, make it easier for organizations, community members to know about the various funding sources that are available in the county. Because you're right, there are many different sources of funding for, organizations, and we want to make sure that, and I think that, if there are some that are eligible for both, maybe we figure out a way to have that conversation upfront so that we're not duplicating um, funding or for the same program. Um, anyway, I know it also probably doesn't answer your question, Steve, but I think it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress to see how both of these processes can work in tandem. Laura, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have several questions, so I'm going to ask two that are related, and then I'll get back in line so other people can ask their questions too. So I think this one's pretty straightforward, but can we know, it would be helpful to know not only the organization that was funded, but the program for which it was funded, because as Steve, you alluded to this as well, like it could be the same program that comes into us or a very related program, or it could be something very different, right? That maybe, and that may factor into, something that we would do in terms of funding. So, I just I think it would be helpful for us to be able to know not only the organization that was funded, but the program itself. So we can know whether it's a full overlap or a partial overlap or no overlap at all. So that's one piece of it. My other question is, I noticed in the bar graph about the different populations served, I think you said in total there were 36 applications and only 33 of them indicated that they were serving marginalized or low income. Are any of the ones that were funded any of the three that did not indicate that? And I'd be curious to know if that were the case.
I have not looked at that, but I will say some organizations took that question in a very limited fashion, where if one population, like one of the descriptors, perfectly fit their target population, they just used that one. And even though other ones might have worked, whereas some organizations took it very loosely and they were like, oh yeah, we serve all these people. So I think that's one question that I think, moving forward, I would like to be a little more clear in the application, saying pick your primary population, just to try to really target, and maybe edit some of the options possibly. But so I haven't looked at that though, but that's an interesting question to know. I'll make note to look at that. And as far as the programs, there was a press release which gave a little blurb as far as what each organization was doing. And so I can put that in the chat if that would be helpful.
Yep, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
I think Chris, you are next.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I can't put my camera on right now, but I just had a comment more than a question. Thank you, Elizabeth, and everyone who worked on this. And I want to say, when I saw the press release that came out, I was extraordinarily grateful and proud of the work that was put through, and also of what programs were being funded. I know that we've looked at a lot of these programs in the past, and I think that the organizations are very well deserved, and it will do a lot of good to the community. So I was very grateful, happy, and proud that Arlington was able to push this, especially giving so much funding to these organizations that I know will help a lot with them throughout the year. So thank you all so much for the work that you all did, and thank you so much for providing this opportunity for those organizations. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I think Margaret, I see your hand next.
So I just wanted to sort of follow up on what Steve said, but rather than a question, just put it out for us to potentially consider. That I do think that in looking down at the list, I was struck by the fact that, I would say, I mean, I'd have to look at the list again, but I would say that probably 80% of the organizations were organizations that we funded as well. And recognizing that, yes, it's a different source of funding and with different, you know, stipulations, certainly, but we administer, I mean, our process has different sources of funding that have different stipulations as well, because we have CDBG, we have the community service block grants, and I can't remember what some of the other ones are, but I know we have, and somehow we've figured out how to, differentiate or make the NOFO cross whatever those requirements are and work it out. So I just, maybe put out on the table the consideration, because if part of what we've discussed is trying to make it easier on all of these organizations to not have to do so much to get the money that they definitely need to operate, that this, is a way, is to make them not have to go through similar but duplicative processes. And so I just put it out on the table for us to consider if there is a way. And I agree with Caitlin that I think we should be looking at the things that worked well, and the things that didn't. The other thing I was struck at was that there was this huge focus on having community reviewers and such, and yet seemingly the same sorts of organizations and program, and well, it remains to be seen because we don't have view on the programs specifically, but the same sorts of organizations were funded. So what that sort of says to me is that, I mean, to some extent, that validates us, that we are being reflective of the community as an advisory group, which I find heartening. And so, and I think perhaps there's some way for us to have that voice shared with the advisory group, so that we're sort of getting that, or making sure that we're continuing to be reflective of the people that are being served going forward. So I don't want to lose that piece, but I do think that that was an interesting validation. And so I'd want to take the best parts of their process if we were to do some sort of, kind of merging or whatever. But I am just profoundly struck by the fact that, if there is some sort of way to merge these, it seems to be crying out for that. So that's it.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that, we'll have to, there's going to be several conversations about sort of how to, how to move forward with all of this. And, we're going to start reviewing our process. So, yeah, I think we can definitely continue to have the conversation. I think, it's a county manager led program right now. So, I guess we'll see how everyone feels after the county manager's office starts monitoring programs and stuff once the fiscal year starts. I'm just kidding. I'm teasing. Okay, Laura, you're next.
Yeah, me again. Sorry. I guess this is more of a question or a point of discussion for us as a committee, as opposed to you, Elizabeth. But do we have enough flexibility in our NOFA in our process through dot night, et cetera, to be able to decide to skip a project that comes in for funding, even if it scores really highly, because it has been funded under this other program. Like, do we have enough flexibility there to make the case to be able to do that? I know in other, grant programs I've seen, that kind of flexibility is built into the NOFA itself, where there is language that says, the ultimate funding decision is not only based on score, but also based on a variety of other factors, whatever that may be. And so I guess I want to check that. I mean, there's not much we can do about it at this point, but maybe for the future. But like, what happens if, if I were a program that got funded, that has traditionally been funded by, the Community Development Fund and is newly funded under this other program, I know full well I'd also be submitting an application under, the community development fund. So there may be a case where we would want to recommend funding from both places, but there's more likely a case where we might not want to do that and direct that funding elsewhere. I don't know. Well, we may not have an answer right now, but
can I?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was
go
sure.
ahead, Jennifer. Yeah.
I had my hand up and I was sort of going to address
Yeah.
that. I mean, I guess two things. I mean, echoing what Elizabeth and Caitlin said, we are trying to coordinate as staff more because obviously we want to make sure that we don't duplicate. So we're starting to have conversations about how to do that on our end. One of the ways that we're going to do that, they're actually going to use Zoom grants, so that's good. So then it'll, that many of the same subrecipients are going to be familiar and comfortable with that. So hopefully to make things easier for them, we can start doing that. We can one thing that we're also talking about doing is we used to be sort of the only game in town, and now there's this NOFA. There's also a food security grant that comes out via NOFA. There's a child care grant. There's like suddenly everybody is bidding things competitively, which I think is here to stay, which is good on the one hand, but on the other, we're going to run into a lot of these issues of are we duplicating? Because when we were doing like everything, we would fund everything. So for example, one thing that struck me with this one is Edu Futuro just got a ton of money through this other program. So does that mean that they don't need our money? And now that there's a food security grant, maybe we stop funding some of our food ones. So I think we're working as staff on how to better duplicate, if only like to be on each other's review committee. So Caitlin was on the equity review committee. Elizabeth has kindly offered to be with ours. So, on our end, we are trying to do that. But this equity NOFA was really a political thing. It was really initiated by the county board. They wanted to like do things differently. And, I think them hearing from you all, this feedback would be really, really helpful. I mean, again, we agree, but I think, for them to understand a lot of the stuff that you all learned, we're doing, and a lot of the programs that we think are being duplicated. So how can you as the county board sort of help facilitate that as well? Because I think that would be important as this starts becoming more kind of institutionalized if it happens every year. So those were my 2 cents.
Wendy, go for it.
Maybe under the NOFA where it talks about leveraging funds, could we put something in there about I think that the intent of the statement as I read it was, how is this money help, right, extending or multiplying other funds that you may have coming in? But maybe that's broadened a little bit to say, will this funding, leverage other monies that you've received from other grants, and just leave it at that, and they can cover other grants from the county.
So that's actually interesting we're talking about that, because leverage, like, does leverage mean you're getting all your money from the county? And the way we've, I've sort of thought of it as you're getting other money. So now if you're Edu Futuro and you're getting $225,000 from the county, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Like, I'm not sure what that does with the leverage score, and I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on that. I mean, are they high leveraging, or are they getting most of their money from the county and therefore doing the opposite? And I don't really know. Nobody has thoughts on that.
I was just hoping, could you reiterate or rephrase or kind of do the question? Are you basically saying that um, we should determine based on how much of the income is coming? So if there's a huge percentage of money coming from the county, then it should be evaluated differently, or we should look at it a different way?
I'm not suggesting that. I guess I'm asking because,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I guess I'm asking that because most of the organizations did not used to get a lot of other county money. And so they get 10 points for leverage, which is I mean, that's 10% of their entire score. So it's
Yeah.
an important score. So I think we need to think about that. If somebody is getting a large grant from another county agency, do we consider that, um, you know, working more towards sustainability, or does it mean that they're really more dependent on the county and really that isn't a great leverage score? So I'm actually not suggesting, I'm just kind of wondering what folks think. And Steve is about to say something wise.
Well, it goes to what is the purpose? Why do we have a leverage score? And if the leverage score is to say you're getting some county money which will help you raise money elsewhere, sort of the county is validating your program with federal money or state money, and therefore you can use that elsewhere. Is that the purpose of the leverage, or is there some other reason to have a leverage score? Particularly since half of it is our opinion and the other half is a mechanical number, as you mentioned. So what is the purpose of the leverage?
Margaret, do you have a thought?
Well, it sort of like strikes me, and maybe I've just been spending too much time with HUD regulations, um but it sort of strikes me like HUD's subsidy layering requirements. So HUD looks at their own stuff and or their own projects and basically looks at subsidy layering, which is looking at how much federal money it actually does look at state and local too, but let's just say it's looking at federal money, but it looks at essentially is there too much non-private monies in a project or in a situation. So in that sense, if we're going to use them as a model, I do think it is, they use it is a model, to say, maybe we do want to say at a minimum, we'd like to see entities use funds other than county funds. So if we are going to have some sort of a match, that we'd like to see it not be from the county. So, I think that that's valid. Yeah.
Elizabeth, did you all ask about?
Then we can sort of talk through as to sort of what we do with that match. But I think, because maybe we change what that match situation should be or something. But I do think that should be encouraging, to depend on something beyond just the county.
Elizabeth, did you all ask about match or leverage at all?
We did ask, and we gave points for having other secure funding sources. But it is a discussion we also had, as far as we don't want these organizations to only exist because the county is supporting them. And I would say, when I did I looked at a lot of applications for NOFAs that were similar in other jurisdictions, and there were several that said, no more than X percent of your budget can come from a county source, or if you're receiving another county grant, you won't be considered for this one. So that's a common idea, I guess.
I wanted to say, just going off, like, how could we? I agree. I agree with what everyone is saying in regards with the question is, how can we encourage programs, nonprofits, to try and find other funding sources as well, that it doesn't rely on county funding only. Um, and like make that publicly known. And I guess that's the hard question, right? Because they'll say, no, half of our funding comes from this, or we have other sources of funding, but a majority of our funding comes from the county. But then it really just puts into an operational question of, if the county is funding the majority of their programs, then how is that even different than if the county funded just a county program doing the same thing, you know? So yeah, I guess that's my big question, is like, how do you encourage these nonprofits to say, hey, you guys actually need to do fundraising to stay alive and stuff like that?
Steve,
mean,
did
I
you have a
think-
comment? Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, from our perspective, one thing we talked about was like in our reporting, and as we work with the nonprofits over the course of the next year, try to guide them, give them encouragement and help them in that way. But right now, I'm the only staff person running this program at the moment, so not quite sure what that'll look like.
Oh, Link, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm still basically hung up on whether the county manager has full confidence in CDCAC, or does the wheel that squeaks the most gets the most oil?
I guess I'm not sure what your question is.
I'm still puzzled as to why there is essentially duplicative evaluations of projects. It may be because one group, not CDCAC, it is screaming loud, or it may be there is county lack of confidence in what we've been doing, because we're doing fundamentally the same thing. Yes, they've redefined some of the projects to be a little bit different than what we would handle. And yet you have a decade or decades experience perfecting an evaluation approach versus a brand new or neophyte group creating a new one. I still don't really understand why we're even having these discussions.
I mean, it was a political thing, but I will say I've never heard, and Caitlin and Elizabeth weighing in, like I've never heard anyone be critical of CDCAC. The people are very respectful of the processes. The county board or the county manager like never comes back and says, why did you come up with this recommendation, or what? Like they really do respect the work that you do. I think this just came out of sort of a different thinking. And as staff, the whole time we were like, we want to, we think it could be end up being duplicative. And I think we found that that's actually true, but it was created as a different process. And I think now we can look at that, and we can look at lessons learned, and hopefully, work together more closely. I mean, I don't know if that answers your, Caitlin or Elizabeth, I don't know if you've heard otherwise.
No, I agree. I was gonna say essentially the same thing, but you said it much better than I could. I've never heard any criticism of CDCAC's work or commitment to this process. I think, as Jennifer was saying before, there's just several the sort of number of NOFAs that have cropped up over the last 3-4 years, I think is just a testament to that the sort of having a competitive process is a good thing. And I think we're trying to figure out how to ensure that as we move forward, that we can, make sure that the duplication is minimized. And I think that's something that we're very committed to. Because we also know that, you all are volunteers, and you're, you do a lot of work in the fall to make make sure that we're reviewing and scoring applications and really taking a thoughtful look at what's coming in. So we want to make sure that our process, the integrity of our process, is maintained as well.
So how do you plan to talk to the county manager about the two approaches?
I think from our perspective, we're getting feedback from, and United Way is gathering all this feedback, and there will be a formal report evaluation in August. I don't know, Caitlin, if you participated in an interview with United Way, but
Not yet.
United Way will be interviewing me as well. And the board is very interested in what the formal evaluation of this process is. So I think these kinds of things will definitely come up. I know the board wants to discuss what this process might look like or where it may fall going forward. I know they want to discuss it soon over the next couple months, month or two. And so I'm sure there will be opportunity to discuss it.
Steve, is your hand up from before? Or did you have another comment?
Another
And actually, I want to
question.
just
Okay.
chime in. I mean, Elizabeth works in the county manager's office, so you know, she'll be bringing this information back as well, I'm sure. And you know, she's been here for 2 discussions and has certainly, I think, heard loud and clear. Not to speak for you, Elizabeth, but you know, hopefully this is feedback that you can bring back in your role in the county manager's office.
Yep.
2 quick things. One, Jennifer, you mentioned it was a political issue, which I fully understand and is appropriate. I mean, it's a government board. But it seems like the individual members were able to give out money to groups completely within their discretion. And they seem to have decided rather than have individual discretion, that they would bucket the money and have this NOFA process and have this whole non-political process. So they're not being buttonholed everywhere they go with people begging for money. So if you're taking the politics out of it, that's a good thing, I think. But so it's no longer political, it's now non-political. And then that leads to the second question of, if United Way is doing this phenomenal review of this program, and then we have our program, should United Way or whoever it is be doing a similar analysis of our program and comparing and contrasting? And maybe they could come up with wonderful things for us. But to just look at the one program, it doesn't seem to be an effective way of doing things without looking at our program as well. And making great recommendations, hopefully.
I'm not exactly sure what Elizabeth, maybe you could talk a little bit about United Way's involvement in the process. I just can't really remember how exactly that came about.
Right. So Katie Crystal applied for a fellowship that resulted in a grant that allowed us to contract with United Way to serve as a consultant to start off these community conversations with BIPOC leaders to discuss how they feel they would like to be heard through a grant process. And so it started off with that particular fellowship and grant from Katie Crystal. And it has continued. Our partnership was extended. The contract was extended a couple times, but it will end in August. So I think it could. I don't know if, yeah, it's an interesting thought, but it would definitely mean extending their contract.
Wendy, did you have another comment?
I did. I just wanted to say, as a relative newcomer, I think that CDCAC should be incredibly flattered because it doesn't seem to me that the Elizabeth's process was altogether that different. Right, the funding pot that we're looking at has, right, some, from my limited understanding, some Arlington money, some money funneled through the state, and some money just through the feds. So all of those layers of regulations and oversight create a different process than I think the elected officials wanted through this process, which was to have a more level playing field for folks to apply. It seems to me they largely modeled it on the work that you all have been doing year after year after year, but they were just allowed to push it out the door a little bit quicker and with a little bit less regulation. And so to me, I can appreciate the fact that it was done that way, right? I mean, we have a whole calendar. Maybe the idea was to just be able to get the money out to the community a little sooner rather than later. And anyway, I just think you all should be incredibly flattered about the work that you do because it seems to be very, very similar.
Oh, Greg, go ahead.
I had a quick question. Excuse me, I had a quick question for Elizabeth based on her most recent statement. Did I understand you to say that this NOFA may not be, it's on a year-by-year basis so that it doesn't have a multiple year commitment? And so that makes me ask the question, what's the risk of this NOFA going away next year or 2 years or 3 years from now?
Yeah, sorry. Our contract with United Way ends in August. So they will be out of the picture. It would be completely in our hands. There was that $1.5 million is supposed to be ongoing funding to continue this process. But I do think that it could very well be in the discussion as far as what this process will look like going forward and where does it best fit in. So the funding, that at least that baseline $1.5 million is ongoing funding. So
Like maybe we've ran out of hands. Should we, any other questions on this side of things? All right. So maybe we should wrap up this discussion and move on to the next item on our agenda.
Yeah, thank you so much
I'm
for joining
sorry,
us,
did you say
Elizabeth.
that?
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'm sorry, did you say that Elizabeth will be able to join us in some way in our process going forward?
Yeah, so we've invited Elizabeth to participate as a staff reviewer this year for the upcoming NOFA cycle. And so I think it'll give her an idea of sort of how our process works and then allow us to kind of confer on sort of how we can improve both processes.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome, Elizabeth.
thank you. Thank you all for your insights. And I took notes and I'll see where they can go.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
All right, let's move on to next item. So next is the FY 2025 final HUD action plan. Do I turn that over to you, Caitlin?
Yes, it's me, and my PowerPoint is now restarting, so I'm gonna try to get it restarted, and while that's happening, I'll just kind of give a quick overview of what we're talking about. So as you know, we submit an action plan to HUD each year. There are some HUD regulatory requirements about when that action plan has to be submitted. We try to get it in before the beginning of the program year, just so that there's no gaps in services for any of our nonprofit organizations. The one complication there is that we often don't know our allocation when we need to have the board approve the action plan. So we talked about the action plan back in April. And at that point, the funding was what were estimates because we did not know our HUD appropriation yet. But we did receive our funding allocation in May. So we are now in the process of revising the action plan so that we can go back to the board, approve the action plan with the final allocation amounts, and then get it submitted to HUD so that we can, before the end of the fiscal year and before the new fiscal year starts on July 1st. So I put together a quick PowerPoint presentation that just kind of describes where the changes are. I will, can you guys see my screen? Okay. So again, we received our final appropriation in May. And so we received about an approximately $11,000 decrease in CDBG over the projected amount, and an approximately $162,000 decrease in home funding from the projected amount. The home program received a huge cut in the budget, the federal budget last year. So that's largely where that decrease is coming from. But the appropriations for other sources, so CSBG, TANF, AHIF Housing Services, and General Fund remain the same. So overall, it's resulted in about $173,000 decrease in funding from the draft that we presented to you in March and the final version that we're looking at today. So essentially, this is the sort of where the spending, how the spending is shaking out. So the original amount that we budgeted for planning administration costs is decreasing due to the decreases in both home and CDBG funding. We have to stay within HUD imposed admin and planning caps. So those amounts are going down a bit. And since the draft action plan was approved in March, or in April, sorry, our projection for the MyPAP program, Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Program, which is our down payment and closing cost assistance homeownership program, the projection for 2025, the budget projection increased from $580,000 to $850,000. So we're proposing to increase that, but then decrease some of the projection for, or the spending for the multifamily program to be able to fully fund MyPAP. We are not recommending any changes to the Community Development Fund grant amounts. And so where it's really shaking out is, in the multifamily, MyPAP, and admin areas. And this is just, again, a quick snapshot of where things are shaking out by goal for under the consolidated plan. Again, this has not changed since the April board action. So the grant amounts that we discussed back in April will not be changing. So as far as next steps, so CDCAC would consider these changes. If you're in agreement, you would recommend approval by the county board. If the committee does recommend approval, we'll then draft a letter of support with Laura. The county board is set to consider the action plan at the June 15th board meeting. And if approved, the funds will be available starting July 1st. So that's all I have. Are there any questions?
So I think our action is to move to approve the action plan. Do I have
Yes,
that
the
right?
final action plan,
Okay.
yes.
I move to approve.
All right, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor of approval of the final action plan?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, think that
I'm
approves.
not
Oh,
gonna
sorry, go ahead.
oppose, but I'm sorry. I'm not gonna oppose, but I'm just gonna abstain because I wasn't here for the earlier presentation. And to be honest with you, I didn't make it through the whole entire 67 pages of the document. So next year, though, I promise.
Right. I think we have all approved, one abstain, and we will, as a committee, approve the action plan.
Great. All right. Well, I think with that, we can go into chair report. Laura?
Yep, and I do have a couple of things, so bear with me, this won't be super quick, but the first one will be quick. I had the opportunity, thank you to Caitlin and Jennifer and others, to attend, what was that, a couple weeks ago, back in later May, the HUD Regional Administrator visit. So these were folks from HUD that came to visit the county staff to kind of, my understanding was to sort of check in to see how things were going. The staff, including Caitlin and Jennifer and others, did an impeccable job of putting together a very detailed document that outlined for HUD, like what's working, what the challenges are with how they're, doing everything, and where additional assistance is needed. So that was pretty cool. I had the opportunity to just provide a summary of sort of the citizen engagement piece of things, so what we do, and so I was able to explain how we are involved in, the recommendations for funding, and I learned a lot just hearing the discussions, hearing the presentations from staff, and the questions that the folks from HUD were asking. So that was very cool. We the meeting took place at Terwilliger Place, which was a cool way to show off one of the county programs to the folks who visited. So really good event. Congrats to Caitlin and Jennifer and the staff for making that all happen and putting on a good nice show for the folks who visited. And I think the only other thing is I sent out an email a while back following a meeting I went to where we were provided with the newly updated draft Arlington County Advisory Group's handbook. And they, encouraged us to send it out, distribute it out to our respective committees and collect feedback from folks. So I don't know if any of you had a chance to take a look at that and have feedback that you'd like to bring up on this meeting. I'd love to hear it, and I can keep track of those, and I can compile everything and send it back to the folks. And if you haven't taken a look at it yet, or you don't have anything to share verbally on the meeting today, you're welcome to also just send me an email with your feedback, and I'll pull that all together. I believe it said it in my email. I don't remember what the date was that they were looking to have feedback on it by sometime in around nowish, like early June.
I think
so
it's
it was sort of
June 11th.
Next week. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's still a little bit of time if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, but I think it sounded like a couple folks had some comments and feedback, and I'm happy that I have it pulled up. I'm happy to kind of share my screen and show it if it's helpful to go to a certain section or something like that. Yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
Okay, I'm going to caveat this with once a reviewer of staff reports, always a reviewer of staff reports. So I'm just going to tick these off really quick because some of them are just picky punctuation stuff that I've had elected officials call me out on. And so, right, my radar is like beep, 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 beep. But at the very beginning where it's the message from the board, they say, quote, typically, right, the involvement of citizen committees typically leads to better results. I would recommend that they actually reconsider that language to be more positive for the focus on the that they in fact have these committees because they feel that there are more positive results as an outcome. I think typically just comes across to me as a little bit derogatory and might reinforce what Link was talking about earlier. On page 5, they talk about state law and county ordinances, and I wondered if you need to add federal as well. There is a reference later on in the document that talks about federal regulations, but it wasn't there on page 5. On page 10, it outlines about meeting minutes, and I just didn't think that that was updated to be consistent with the virtual policy that you shared with us. That's old language that needs to be updated. On page 17, there's no mention of the camera and being in front of it. We can all ignore that I said that, but anyway. On page 26, there's inconsistencies in the punctuation in the purple box. The first 2 bullets need punctuation at the end of the sentences. And then on page 28, number 7, again, inconsistencies in the use of punctuation, and that needs to be made consistent. That's it.
Laura, I think you're muted.
All right. What I said was, thank you, Wendy. We will add those to the list. I captured what you said. Anybody else have a chance to take a look and have any comments or edits or additions? All right. If not, but you do want to sit and take a look, go for it. Send me an email. I'm happy to add those to the list, and I will plan to, hopefully, if I remember, I'll make a note to myself that before I gather everything up by the 11th and send it off, I'll send one more reminder just for any last minute additions.
Great.
So that does it for me for the chair's report. Do we have any other staff report or committee report?
I guess the only
Sorry,
other.
Oh, sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Wendy.
So I just wondered if we had any comment on the draft NOFA, if we should just send those to Caitlin.
Yeah, I was going to mention that in the staff report. I sent the NOFA this afternoon. I tried to largely capture most of the comments from the last meeting. If you notice anything in there that you have comments on, feel free to send them to me via email, and we can go from there. What I will say that Laura, do you have anything else as far as your chair's report? I could just move right into the staff report. Okay. So thanks for bringing up the NOFA, Wendy. So I'll just give a quick kind of overview of where most of the changes are. I reorganized a lot of the questions. I consolidated some, I added some. I did not send a red line version because it was a sea of red, so you wouldn't have really been able to see where the changes were. So if you would like me to send the 2025 NOFA so that you can kind of look at them side by side, I'm happy to do that. But folks who have been doing this for a while we'll probably be able to see kind of where the changes are. I also made some changes to the evaluation criteria to try to better match the evaluation criteria to how the NOFA is now organized. So when you're reviewing, I would focus mostly on those 2 sections just to make sure that you're if you had any recommendations at the last meeting that they were captured in the sort of reorganization and editing of the questions. And feel free to send those to me via email.
And sorry.
Go ahead, Margaret.
Oh, I was gonna say I didn't raise my hand. Did you confirm for us, based on the last discussion, that we are constrained by the number of questions if so, what is that number?
So Zoom Grants has expanded the number of questions that we can use. We did confirm that. So I think We're not, I think what we have in there now, you know, we're all set to be able to meet that within the system constraints. And they did say that if there is a constraint, they can go back and through the back end help us add more. I don't exactly know how that works, but we are not constrained by the number of questions.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any other thoughts on the NOVA?
I do have a number of points, but I'll email you.
Yes, that'd be great.
I
Thank
failed
you.
on the advisory committee, but I did do this one. So I've got notes on this one.
Perfect. Thank you, Steve. All right. So the only other staff report is the tenant summit. And Jennifer, did you want to give a quick update about that?
Sure. We're holding a tenant summit on Saturday. It will be at Leber Run from 10 to 2. And we're going to have a series of workshops. So we'll have a workshop on sort of how to find a rental, DHS programs and services related to housing. We have an attorney from Legal Services of Northern Virginia talking about tenant rights and responsibilities. And then we have a panel of county staff on property maintenance. So someone from our team, someone from environmental health, someone from code enforcement. And in between, we're building in lots of time for staff to sort of mill about and have folks answer specific questions. So if you're interested or you know anyone who's interested, please stop by. We'll have food and gift cards and raffles. It'll be super fun. And Leber Run is beautiful. If you haven't been there, it's nice just to go check it out.
And you said that's 10 to 2, right?
Yeah.
On Saturday.
Correct.
All right. I guess the next item would be member reports. All right. Well, Laura, I will turn it back over to you.
Right. Well, thanks everybody for a very efficient and successful virtual meeting. I guess we will see you. We will see you all in person. Not in July, is that correct? Did we decide that? We will not meet in July. We will not meet in August, and I will see you all the first week in September.
Yep.
Have a great summer, everybody.
Yeah,
and
have a great summer.
See you all soon. Let's
all right.
go
Thanks,
ahead
guys.
and adjourn.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you.
Thank you.